But again, it is my pleasure first to introduce to you Mr. Jim Eckley. A little bit about Jim, if I may. Jim has been a real estate broker for over 30 years, but also has been a practicing attorney for over 36 years. He is also a forensic engineer. He is also, again, he is president of Eckley & Associates Home Inspection. He's also the purveyor of Buildmasters as well. And he has been on numerous advisory committees here locally in Arizona, also in California and other states. It is a multi-state practice that includes construction law, real estate law, agency law, securities and finance law, and he operates main offices here in Phoenix, but has offices in California, Oregon, and Washington. He is a very dynamic speaker. He also happens to have another title that he added this past year, My Boss. Please welcome Jim Eckley.
Thanks, David. Hence why the introduction that lasted probably longer than the presentation. You know, I did notice one thing on the way up, and that is, see these napkins? Of course, I really thank the club here for having such nice ones. But they could make a hell of a tie, wouldn't you think? Or a scarf? These are really nice looking. They were also talking about age earlier, and I thought I probably ought to chime in. This is something that happened to me recently, and I guess I suspect I'm probably older than everybody that came up here and touted how old they were. But I had this event happen. You know, we get in front of the mirror as time goes on. We always see ourselves sort of like that 20 or 25-year-old we used to be. You know, you go, hey, I'm not doing too bad. You know, a little here maybe. And then you go to a Christmas party and they take a picture. About a month later, you get a copy of the photo. And you're looking at it, you're going, who in the hell is that old guy over in the corner? And you go, my God, it's me! This is the time that usually is the alert that time is flying. I've been asked today to come up here and talk a little bit about the State of the Union, but I had a couple remarks I'll make first. And when I start talking about the State of the Union, the way I want to talk about it is some of the dysfunctionalities that I think we're still facing. I think Dr. Wong is going to probably chime in with some of the same. So there'll be a little negative overtone to some of these, but most of it is for purposes of motivating us to know what the big issues are to try to do better in the future. First of all, I'm on one of the committees for Commissioner Lowe. I've been on probably every commissioner's committee of some kind since Joe Vitello, and I will have to say, and I think this remark was made earlier, but it's well worth it in restating, that never has someone taken so little and done so much. This poor lady has started out with pennies, and yet she has generated dynamic and enlightened enforcement like no other commissioner before. And I want to say thank you very much. It's really a privilege to be on her committee, and she's done a wonderful job. Also, I heard a story about Mr. Park. I guess he went to a party over in San Diego, and there was an attorney there at the party as well. And he was noticing that no one would go and talk to the attorney at all at the party, and yet everybody was asking him for advice. Should I buy? Should I sell? What should I do with my investments? And he's thinking, gee, I can't even have any fun, and yet no one is paying any attention to that attorney. So finally, out of curiosity, he went to the attorney and he asked him, he says, how is it that they're just bugging the blazes out of me and they're not talking to you? And he said, well, the reason is they used to do that. But I started going home and billing them for it. And then they stopped. And he says, well, that's a heck of a good idea. So the next day he got up and he wrote out a bill to everyone that had spoken to him. And he went down to his mailbox to put it in, and guess what there was there? A bill from the attorney. So, having said that, let me launch into what I consider to be some of the issues that are facing us out here. And I'm going to be anecdotal about this. These are ones that I think are going to still face. I think Mr. Wong's going to come up. I'm not going to steal his fire and say that we're still not out of this, and I think we all know that. One of the things we have to realize is that since we're in the commission business, commissions have been generally good, but for the public, and if you look at the AREAA sign here, it's talking about habitat, humanity, shelter. For the public, it's been awfully terrible. It's a little bit like Hurricane Sandy went through. For the population, it's absolutely terrible, but for the building contractors, it's great. So, in a sense, as an attorney, we've been through the same thing. We've had some of our best years ever. But remember, the D's in attorney: dogfight, default, divorce, disaster, gloom and doom, generates legal work. But it doesn't mean that society as well, simply because our legal rates are way up there this year as compared to what they've been historically. So we do have to remember how much suffering has taken place out there in the public as we have been making some commissions, attempting to find some solution for them through such things as short sales. And I'm going to have to say that as long as short sales dominate 60 and 70% of the marketplace, remember what we're manufacturing there. We're manufacturing default, we're manufacturing parties who probably won't get credit for at least 3 to 5 years, will not be back into our market, and may never be back in our market. The misery that goes along with losing a home in which they invested their stake of care and confidence, and of course they really feel like it's the one they really wanted to be in, it's their nest. To suddenly not have it and find themselves on a park bench is not very pleasant, and of course there's sometimes tax ramifications with that, and certainly there's social ramifications to even our society as community cohesiveness. We're losing all of our old family neighborhoods. There's a great flux out there that probably isn't really very good. So for those that we have been assisting, I guess we've done a good job in bringing them up and allowing them to move on under these programs we've been given by the federal government in order to enable them to do that. But as far as what they've experienced, it's been pretty awful. Now the question is it going to be awful for me here? Well, here's some of the anecdotes, and I say these as a lawyer because I'm down in the trenches and I'm trying to fix the damage. What we are is we're sort of like repair folks. We're down here trying to take those people now that have been, society has ejected or oppressed in one way or another economically, and we're trying to do something about it. There's not a lot of tools, but we also do have to look ahead and try to decide what challenges are out there and meet them. One of them is taxes. Now we know, of course, there was all sorts of flux prior to the time that a tax resolution was reached on the so-called tax cliff. Henry's going to come up here and tell you that the economic cliff is still up there. But from the tax standpoint, at least we got resolution, that's good. But here's some things, after you read the Taxpayers Reduction Act of 2012, that are a little less than apparent, but it tells us that there's still some troubles ahead, or at least it defines a marketplace for us, and it also defines where we're going to have clients who are going to have a lot of trouble. For one thing, the threshold on itemized deduction phase-outs. Remember, the biggest itemized deduction for most people is the home mortgage interest deduction. NAR has fought hard. I know most of the organizations in real estate have fought hard to retain this, but it looks like ultimately it has been lost. It's going to be phased out, at least 80% of it, after incomes of $250,000 for single filers, $300,000 for married filing jointly. So that means after that, there's a phase out that goes all the way up to 80% of the mortgage interest deduction as the Tax Act is currently written. Now, IRS is going to have to come up with some guidelines about how that's all going to be applied. But look at the ramifications of that. Here's what it means. It means then that you could actually pay mortgage interest, which you'll never get a deduction for. That means it's money that's gone permanently at certain levels of income and a certain level of property, which I'm going to mention in a moment. Now, how many people are going to be willing to do that? Is that going to create another sales hurdle for us? Or is it likely that homes are going to have to fall back, maybe in pricing, until such time as they produce a fully deductible home mortgage interest rate? I would say that that's more likely the case. So that could be a market depressor out there. But we do have to remember then that when we get to those folks that are at a $250,000 to a $300,000 income, the mortgage interest rate deduction fades away. Now, Dodd-Frank just came out yesterday with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau came out with its interpretation of some Dodd-Frank provisos that were drafted clear back in July of 2010, but finally they put some regulations behind them. And it's talking about new ways of qualifying for mortgages. And here's some of the things that they've said. Now, these are our rules, they're hard and fast. One of them is there will be no further interest-only loans, just period, there isn't going to be. Secondly, they don't want any balloons, any loans with any balloons. Now, we have, I'm sure, all of us clients that those would work fine for. But by underwriting standards, they're not going to be available. They also said that the new suspect rate is that if the borrower is spending more than 43% of their gross annual income, and that's collectively between mortgage payment and all the other expenses in their lives, then that mortgage is not going to qualify for underwriting either. So that is going to limit borrowing capability by a lot of folks. So that means, again, that's a downward pressure on the market. So, and of course, obviously, if interest rates increase, that's also a downward pressure on the market because people can afford less when their debt service is more. So you can see these things sort of rolling down the pipe, and they are unanswered questions. And so if you have the double whammy of interest that is not deductible, yet it's going to be included for purposes of qualifying you for a loan, so that if it's high interest, you'll qualify for less loan, and yet it's not even deductible, isn't that the double whammy? So that seems to be building the code. The other thing they did is We have section 165H in the Internal Revenue Code that says that interest stops being deductible at $100,000 in the first million anyway. Not very many of us are in that kind of world, but if we go out there nationally, there really are. So what that means then is you start off with anybody that has more than $8,300 in interest debt service a month will lose all deductions after that automatically, whether they pay them or not. And now we have the added element that even if they could get to that 100,000, they're never going to get there because if they have an income over 300,000, they're not going to be able to deduct any of it. You see what I'm saying? It starts phasing it completely out. So what does that do to our high-level middle income and our jumbos? Where do they go? And in this part of this country, of course, we have low property values right now, and even when we have high ones, when we talk about, wow, it's a $2 million house, that's chump change in Rancho Santa Fe. That'll buy you a hut out behind the house someplace, where they keep the landscaping tools. So that isn't much on a national basis. So that's another crisis I'd see coming. Another big surprise, flips. They're qualifying all these folks that came in, bought property and sold it, and bought property and sold it. They're trying to claim for capital gain treatment. They're going to be denied that. IRS is coming down hard on those and auditing all the flippers right now. They're saying, look, you only get capital gain if you held it for investment or business purposes, held it for a year or more without the intention of reselling it and that it wasn't inventory. But if you're buying it for purpose of flipping it, you're a dealer. You're going to get ordinary income treatment. What a surprise some of these folks are in for when they go back to their chartered accountant in Canada, for instance, and show them what they just did. They're going to be looking around, I think, for malpractice insurance about that point in time. Then the second item, of course, is this. I noticed most of the Canadians in the foreign community that came to Arizona, and I see this again and again and again, same with the Asian community, have been advised to start an LLC to buy the property and dispose of the property. Now, many of the Asian community are Canadian. They came through the Commonwealth country. And certainly, if you do file taxes in Canada, be advised that if you're an LLC, you're taxed at double the ordinary rate if you sell as an LLC. The smarter move would have been to spun it out, sold it personally, and then spun the money back into the LLC. A lot of people have not been told that. They're going back to their chartered accountants in Ontario or something, and they're getting the bad news, and they are not happy. So these are the kind of things that are the tax surprises out there. About the Dodd-Frank surprises. Boy, there's a lot of them. One of them we have to look at, we all remember the Dodd-Frank Act. You know what really the Dodd-Frank Act was when Glass-Steagall was terminated by President Clinton in 1999. That was the act that insulated banks and Wall Street so they couldn't cross-invest in each other. It was created a firewall so that a fire in one would not burn to the other, and then you'd lose on both sides like what happened in 1929 during the Great Depression. When it was done away with, Congress was, of course, aghast, certain members of it. They knew there was not enough horsepower to get Glass-Steagall back in, so they reenacted as Dodd-Frank. Here's a couple of the elements of Dodd-Frank that are going to push us. Dodd-Frank says that all mortgage bankers have to have a skin in the game, that they have to have at least 5% in their portfolio. Now, you know how a mortgage banker works. They loan the money, they season it, they resell it. Then they take that money back, and they season it, loan it, season it, and sell it again. Well, do remember, at every single portfolio turn, they have to have 5% in the game. How long is it going to be before 5% in all the games completely depletes them of capital and they can't lend any more money until they start collecting it? That was a great idea. Skin in the game was to make it so we wouldn't write these rotten instruments and send it down saying say it's somebody else's problem. Also, it's required that every mortgage broker, underwriter, and seller has to give reps and warranties that actually guarantees that all the due diligence was done properly. That wasn't before. It was just sent downstream. What the heck? Let the next guy worry about it. And this is, of course, to stop what's happened since then. So there's some elements in Dodd-Frank that sound good. But what they really seem to work out to do is mean less money, less available borrowing money out there. That skin in the game is certainly one of them. There's some others, too. For instance, qualifying how a borrower qualifies to even get the loan. You know, it even reaches out to personal finance. So owner carries are now regulated starting January 21st. Now, why would people think about owner carries? Because it may be the only finance left if they can't buy through conventional financing. Because after all, are the banks really lending any money right now? Their prop desk is playing Wall Street. That's where all the money's coming from with your dollars. You will see if there's not going to be much finance coming from that direction, or if it's going to be harder to reach and bigger qualifications, you want to go to private finance. Plus, since capital gains have been substantially increased, wouldn't you want to take installment sale treatments for lower taxes rather than a one lump sum treatment on the sale? Well, Dodd-Frank now says that even private parties, even if I was selling my house to my mother, I've got to jump through the same underwriting standards as I would for a fully conventional loan. Otherwise, it's in violation of Dodd-Frank. So it's reached out to places we never even dreamed of. And I'm going to use up all my time, and I probably already have, but let me get a couple other points. Here's something that I wanted to point out. Arizona has prospered for several reasons, one of which is it's the second of the 5 states that most foreign money is going to. The big deal out there is going to be foreign funds and foreign parties. And why? Because we got the Persian Spring, we got the Arabic Spring. There's a lot of things going on right now with countries that have been long-term monarchies, oligarchies, aristocracies. Most of these folks are a little worried that their money is going to be nationalized, and they have every reason to think that, because it very well might be. And so they're moving out. They're moving the big money out. Now, one of the places they used to go was the UK. You know, all of the European Union was a fairly safe harbor, and the banks had penetrated their areas years and years ago, actually right after World War I, so they knew them well, and many of them had banks right down the street. Well, the problem is the euro now is wobbling, and so most of that money's coming here. There's an estimate in The Economist 2 months ago that said over the next 10 years, probably 300 to 400 trillion will migrate to the United States of foreign funds. If you're not out there in that marketplace, wow, you're missing the big one. So I think that's really important. The second thing is positioning yourself for another reality. The $26 billion that's funding a lot of short sales right now, remember the big national mortgage settlement, $26 billion? It's almost gone. It'll actually run out in about June. But keep this in mind about that $26 billion. The $26 billion is mostly be coming to the non-deficiency states. Why is it going to the non-deficiency mortgage states like we are? Here's why. Because they get an offset for every write-down on every short sale against the $26 billion. The way it's being settled is they pay the check from their left pocket to their right pocket. So when you go out and you get that short sale for your client and they rub it down 100 grand and he walks away with a terrible tax edge and other things, and awful credit, when they take it down $100,000, remember, they're getting their check as a offset to the $26 billion that they owe to settle with America for their predation. So they're actually getting paid from the left to the right, but remember this, if they're getting paid in full by that settlement, why should you walk away with a crappy credit rating? They're paid in full from the settlement. Why should that be? Also, why should there be any disregard or debt relief on which you might be subject to tax? They've been paid in full under the terms of the settlement. But let's go one step further. Why are they in the non-deficiency states? Big hoopla just starting to get kicked up on this thing now lately. It's because they weren't going to get the money in the first place in the non-deficiency, yet they are allowed to accredit it against their $26 billion just as though they actually wrote a check. You see? So they're saving up the deficiency states. They're going to go get them next where they can get the money after they use the $26 billion up on assets of which there was no deficiency in the first place. Wow. So we are the recipient here of a great deal of federal largesse, but it's going to disappear. So keep that in mind. And a lot of these short sales that seemed to get a lot easier last year after the 26 bill was signed off and started flowing, they're going to get a lot harder in about June. So I guess what my point is that we're not out of this thing yet, and you really need to keep your eyes out. This is really going to change. I think one of the big outreach programs is definitely international. And this organization is definitely on top of that and ought to reach out more. And since it's not over yet, I think there's one other thing we ought to start asking ourselves towards the tail end. Remember that a lot of this fiscal cliff is created, they're saying, by social programs and entitlement programs. Now, those social programs and entitlement programs barely amount to the $15 trillion that the bailout of the banks has cost us. Why don't we start talking about collecting that from the banks? How come I don't hear anybody talking about that? That's where the money is, and that's where we should be collecting it, as opposed to talking about increasing your taxes and wrapping down your benefits. Well, I've said enough to be controversial, and I guess that's probably my ambition today, so thank you very much. I'll be after here if there's any questions about any of this. Thank you.